Welcome back, my healthcare humans. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of The Other Human in the Room. Okay, so today's topic is winter holiday overwhelm. So, whatever you celebrate, whatever your country and local government celebrates, whether it's Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, winter solstice, or even just you don't celebrate any of those personally, but you have the option to have time off this time of year. I think for many people, and in particular those of us that work in healthcare, it can be a really overwhelming time of year because there's sort of the usual things that people think about for holidays, right? If you're going to buy presents, what get-togethers you're going to organize, what visits you're going to make, what meals you're going to make, all the usual stuff, which can be very fun, but also a lot. And you're adding that on top of your regular work in healthcare, which is always busy. And then this time of year, especially where I live up in Canada, um, this year has been one of really the worst in terms of so many different viral illnesses flying around, especially in really young kids. Like the healthcare system is really struggling and really just not at all keeping up with the demand right now. And so as a result, there's extra pressure to keep working, to keep doing the most while you're trying to add in things for yourself and for your family and things that are supposed to feel magical and special, but that are hard to feel magical and special when you're like totally burnt out from work. Never mind that like half of the parties that you might be hoping to go to are going to get canceled or switched to Zoom, or you're not going to be able to go because someone spikes a fever. Like it's a lot, right? For me, I know my brain likes to go into overwhelm. In the past few years in particular, it's been a lot to handle. And this year feels extra challenging. We are going to try and really get on a plane and see some family. And it feels my brain has a lot of drama about doing that and about what happens if someone gets sick and what about my patients. And I know I'm going through a lot. So as always with this podcast, I like to record topics that are relevant to me and things that I'm processing and going through with the hopes that I'm not the only one. And therefore, what I'm going through and processing what I'm going through not only serves me, but also serves someone else out there. And so in this case, I was noticing that when I'm thinking about all of these things that I'm going to have to try and figure out over the next month or so, because I'm recording this right at the start of December 2022, um, my brain just wants to tell me that there's too much to do and it feels overwhelmed. And then when I feel overwhelmed, I usually don't do much of anything. I end up procrastinating what I'm going to do. I end up only half doing certain things and kind of frantically running around, but not being very like effective or efficient at getting tasks done. And so at the end of the day, I end up creating even more to do. And I actually don't get done what I want to get done. Cause like, if you just notice what I just said. So say I'm starting the beginning of a work day and I had, my usual inbox tasks and forms and patient visits to do. Plus I was planning to try and do some holiday shopping. I was trying to make a plan with a friend or like whatever it is. But if I'm living in the story of there's too much to do, and I'm looking at that day, then when I open my inbox, like I'm flipping back and forth between doing my inbox and then trying to do shopping, or I'm distracted when I'm trying to see patients and I'm not getting my charting done. And I'm so overwhelmed, I'm spending time, probably scrolling some social media, you know, going to have extra snacks that I'm not actually hungry for, whatever, like the things that I do to help me delay the discomfort of feeling the overwhelm. Like I'm just sort of trying to soothe myself and do things that are self-soothing to me. And those are fine, but if I already had a lot to do, they're certainly not going to help me get more done. I've just added more to my plate, right? So the problem here that I've realized and what is going on underneath this model, like when I say model, I mean what's going on underneath this story of there's too much to do. Really, our brain only deals with the present moment. Like our brain's only job is to assess the absolute present moment and current situation and close by things in terms of things in the near future and near past that are relevant to our survival right now. So when I say there's too much to do, my brain hears that as like, literally, I need to get all of it done right now, this minute. And then my brain's like, does not compute. I cannot do 20 things in the span of 10 minutes. That's not possible. So, of course, it gets overwhelmed. So, underneath, what's happening is I'm taking ownership over tasks from the future. I'm taking ownership of a whole variety of tasks and things that I probably will do in the future, but emotionally I'm owning them like I need to get them done now. And I'm kind of like telling my brain and my body is feeling the message like these all need to be done immediately. And then it's freaking out because like you really can't go shopping for holiday gifts at the exact same time you're doing your inbox, at the exact same time you're trying to call a specialist, at the exact same time you're trying to whatever else thing you're doing, right? But that's what happens. And so it's like causes like a three car pile up in our brains. Um, and it's just going to shut down. We have this ownership, obligation, responsibility for things that aren't in our immediate attention. And it just doesn't serve us, right? And so then we think that it's these things, we think it's these to-do list tasks that are actually causing us to feel overwhelmed. But it's our worry story, it's our ownership story underneath the thing that we're telling ourselves about that list that's causing overwhelm. So, say you had a to do list and it had like 20 items on it, you know, if your default story is like mine, it's like, I have to get all of these done and I don't know how I'm going to get them done and there's just too much to do, then I'm feeling anxious and overwhelmed and I'm just going to shut down, right? But someone else could look at that exact same list of 30 things and be like, no problem. I know how to get that done. I've gotten 30 things done in a week before. You know what I mean? And they're just like, let's go. And someone else could look at that list and like laugh hysterically and be like, obviously, I'm not going to do all of these things. Like, I only have 24 hours in the day. I know how much some of these things take, how much time some of these things take, and I know I'm not going to be able to do them. So I will do these three things, and the rest will have to be done by someone else, or they're just not getting done at all. Right. So you could tell yourself a different story about this exact same task list that you've developed for yourself and feel very differently and act very differently out of that. So I want to offer you this as sort of your new healing human story when you think about all the things that your brain is saying you have to do immediately that are causing you overwhelm this winter holiday season. What if the story you tell yourself instead is, I always get to decide what I want to do. I am always the authority over my time, my energy, my attention, my life, period. So when you look at that list and you know, I'm the boss of how this gets done, I'm the boss of if some of these things on my list get done. What are the things on this list I actually want to get done? And how can I let go of the rest? Right. And practically speaking, what I find very useful to do when I'm starting my day, I'm noticing my list and feeling overwhelmed, is I tell myself it's not mine to do until I'm actually doing it, right? Because that's actually what's the most true thing. Like your brain can keep telling you, you have to finish that ODSP form. If you're from Ontario, you'll know what I mean by that. Your disability form. Your brain can keep reminding you and beating you up for that tax filing you haven't done yet. But the truth underneath is it's not yours to do until you're actually doing it. And the way you know that is, I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes you have things on your to-do list and they literally never get done. And so how could that be yours to do? Like you literally never get them done, right? There can be other things on your to-do list, which if you haven't gotten to them yet, someone else does them for you. I've noticed this a lot with my email inbox. So um, for a time, I was really like playing around with inbox efficiency. I've gotten to a point where I really do get to inbox zero at least once per day with my EMR inbox. Only on weekdays, I don't check my inbox at all on weekends actually. And that's sort of a framework that I've set up that works really well for my EMR. For my email, I was trying and practicing doing that same thing. But then I made a decision that that wasn't my priority. So instead, I now process my email inbox But I'm not trying to get through them all in like a very short period of time. And I've noticed this magical thing happen. So, like, there'll be an email that comes into my inbox, and my brain will be like, "Oh, this is so urgent." But then I'm like, no, I'm not going to answer that right now because I'm actually focused on doing other things. I have other priorities for my day. And so a few days, a week, sometimes like a couple weeks go by before I get to that particular email. And then when I look at it, the person has actually solved their own problem. Or it was urgent enough that then they like called me or texted me instead of emailing me. Like I'm starting to view email as sort of like a version of snail mail where it's like I get to pick which ones I want to answer right now that feels timely and relevant to me. And the rest, if they are urgent enough, then either they're going to reach out to me or whatever time I reply back to them, even if it's like a month later, is going to be the perfect amount of time because it'll have been worth it to them to wait a month. So that's an example of like that email and responding to that email isn't mine until I'm actually doing it. And I am the authority of when I do it. I am in charge of how I spend these 24 hours per day. I don't know if you know this, folks, but we actually only all get 24 hours in a day anyway. And so it's really good to know that you can't create more time literally. We all have 24 hours in our day, and we get to decide what we do with that time. And we're always in charge of it. And the only thing we actually need to focus on at any given time is the task that's right in front of us. So in terms of like practically how that works, in terms of how do you like take this human story of I'm the authority of my time and it's not mine until I'm actually doing it. And how do you put it into practice? So, um say I'm doing something and then a new task pops into my brain, or I'm in a conversation with someone and they're like, "Oh, could we do this thing?" Like how do you do it so that you actually like remember what you want to do and prioritize your time? So I have like a to-do list sort of app, but you could have a notes app or like a journal, and I just write it down. I don't Sometimes I schedule it right away if it's something I know is a priority, but most of the time if it's like a this would be nice to get done and I probably am going to possibly do it, I just like throw them all onto a list. And then I have one time per week where I sit down and look at that list. And the first thing I do is like, okay, so which of these are actually mine with my 24 hours times 7 days that I actually want to get done this week? Make sure I'm coming to these things from desire. There'll be ones that sit there and I'm like, oh no, I really should. I really need to. But if I ask myself, do I want to? The answer is no. Those get crossed off. The only things that end up on the list are things that I want to do, that I have a desire to do, that I have motivation and purpose, and that match with what more globally I want to do with my time, right? So recording the podcast is getting on my calendar every week because when I write it down on the list, I look at it and say, yes, doing this podcast is something that is meaningful to me. So the time I spend doing it is worth the investment of my time for what I'm able to offer the world and what it means to me personally to be able to share this content with you in your ears, right? So then after I've like prioritized and crossed out the things that I'm like, oh, those are actually not mine to do at all, I take those things and I put them into my calendar. And then I spend the rest of the week keeping each of those promises to myself. This is something I talked about last week on the podcast, right? So this is how it works really practically. And especially at a time of year when literally it feels, and when you write out the list, it could be literally true, like you have double the amount of tasks that you're trying to offer to yourself. This is when it becomes the most critical to do that first step of like, okay, write down everything you think you should do and think that you need to do, and think that are all the priorities that you have to have at this exact same time in the month of December. And then really get honest with yourself. Which of these do you want to do? If it feels too scary to cross the rest off the list, you can like leave them on the list, but like highlight the ones that you actually want to do and put those on your calendar first. And then if there's room left on your calendar, you could add a couple of the others that you're like, but it is so nice when I hand make Christmas ornaments. I don't know, like maybe that's a want to do, but maybe that's like would be nice to do. Those can be bonus things, but really focusing in and remembering that you have the power to decide how you spend your time, and that what you want and what you desire and what is actually most important to you has to take priority over how you spend your time. Otherwise, you end up feeling overwhelmed and helpless and are basically lying to yourself by saying that you're not in charge of your time when you absolutely are. And if you feel a little bit resistant to me saying that, you're like, but I have all these obligations. Like, I have to make sure I go to work every day. I have to make sure I see all my patients. I have to make sure my kids go to all their lessons. Just like really double and triple check all of those have tos, because I know for a fact that there are clinicians who are not showing up at work every day. There are clinicians who are leaving the practice of medicine right now, right? They said, I've had enough. I don't want to do this anymore. And they're leaving, right? And there are parents who are like, I don't have time to drive you to your lesson. It's not going to happen today. Either you figure out another way to go to your lesson or you're not going, right? There are people who are choosing the opposite of what you think you have to be doing. So, are you going to convert that have to into a choose to want to for yourself? Because really you want to do it. And what you're saying is, I need to prioritize this. I want to prioritize this over other things. Or are you just feeling guilty and obligated? You actually don't want to do it. And actually, that means it's not for you this week. And even if that means you're breaking your streak, or what about commitment or whatever, like ultimately, at the end of the day, especially at a time like this, when the task list grows and grows, you are still in charge of your time. The healthcare system might be totally falling apart, and all your family may have a million obligations and expectations for what you're supposed to do for them. Guess what? Use those as excuses if you need to. Tell your family the healthcare system's falling apart. That's why I can't do the things I've never wanted to do this year. And to the healthcare system, you're like, listen, I really got to spend some time with my family. So that's why I can't do all the extra shifts that I actually don't want to do. So, like, if you want, you can, like, in the meantime, when you're saying it out loud, pretend you're still obligated to that other thing you want to do. But in the middle, you can actually spend this December, this holiday season, only doing what you want to do at this darkest time of the year, at a really tough time in healthcare. My invitation and like my challenge to you is, what would happen if you took everything you felt overwhelmed about, prioritized which of those things you actually want to do, and left the rest of them for someone else to do? And notice that it was totally fine and nobody died and it was actually awesome. I think we really think that if we don't follow through with every single one of our obligations, something terrible will happen. It's just not the case. And if you're like, no, I really have an exception to this, reach out to me. I'll listen to it. Maybe you have the one exception to this rule, and that's fine. And you'll let me know. But my guess is, if there is actually something in your sphere that would genuinely, truly, completely self-combust, fall apart, someone would die, etc., if you didn't do very specific tasks, and that was something that was literally in your job description to help with, like, I'm assuming that's going to be on your want to do list, because most people don't like look at someone dying in the face and be like, sorry, right? So, like, just really be clear about the things that you think you absolutely have to do, or it will all fall apart. Like, what happens if it doesn't? One of my greatest gifts over these past few years, around holiday expectations and obligations, and that I want to offer to you, is like, remember how for the last few years, most of us have just like barely been to a single holiday party and barely acted out like any, if at all, any of like the family obligation stuff that can happen this time of year. And remember how like nobody, actually, it was important to not do most of those things so that people didn't die. Like, that was like, finally you had a reason to not follow through on family obligations that didn't feel good to you. So if you're now like, okay, well, now it's, I know there's some part, I think it's okay. I think the rules say we're allowed to see people. So now I can't use as an excuse. And so now I guess I just have to go back to like doing everything that my bossy auntie tells us we have to do every holiday season, like whatever it is for you. Just like notice that that is optional, and you actually never have to do that thing ever again if you don't want to do it. Only do it if you want to do it. Please do it for me. Okay. Okay. So just to get really clear on what I'm saying here, here's my invitation to action for you. List everything your brain says is included in the too much to do for this holiday season. Make a big list. Make it for the whole month of December. Like, what are all the tasks that your brain keeps bouncing around in your head? That's like, I have to make sure I do this. I have to make sure this. Write them all down in one setting. Might take you 20 minutes. I don't know, but write them all down. Everything that your brain says you're obligated to do. And take a look at that list and understand, if I am really the authority of my time and my energy this month, circle the ones that make it. Circle the ones that are valuable enough for you to do. And if some seem in conflict with each other, sit with yourself and solve the conflict. There is a million creative ways that two things that seem like they can't be done at the same time could be done creatively, including like asking someone else to do some of it for once. Novel idea. So only leave that short list of what you want to do in this next month. That's what you want to do and choose to do because it serves something you want to happen in your life. Everything else goes. And then you take those things, you put them in your calendar, and you practice doing them one at a time. And anything you think, yeah, but I have to, I need to every year. Those, my friend, I hope are the first thing to go. Okay. If you want to have help with this, sometimes this is hard to do in isolation. I just want to remind you that I have a one-on-one coaching practice. And actually, right now, this podcast is the first day that I'm starting to officially launch that I am focusing my one-on-one coaching practice in on a new coaching program called Stop Worrying About Your Patients. One of the main areas I work with my coaching clients around like how they're worrying and what they feel overwhelmed about is time. And often they worry about their patients because they feel like they don't have enough time to do everything they think they have to do in order to be a good clinician and actually serve their patients. And when we clean up this confusion and overwhelm over how they can spend their time, they suddenly worry about their patients way less because they know they will get done what they need to get done, and the rest isn't for them. The rest is up to the patient or up to someone else to help them with. It is one of the most satisfying worries to work on and release with my clients. And I would love for you to be my next client in doing that work. So, in the show notes of this episode, you'll find a link to more information about that coaching program. And I would love to see your application soon. And in the meantime, I'll see you next week, hopefully slightly less overwhelmed over this winter holiday season. Take care.